December 18th, 1995, 9:47 a.m. Kensington Palace was eerily quiet. The winter sun struggled through heavy clouds, casting pale light across Diana's private sitting room. Diana's hands were steady as she unfolded the crisp royal stationery. Not trembling, not this time. 6 pages. That was how long the Queen's letter was. And Elizabeth Windsor, the most powerful woman in Britain, Diana's mother-in-law for 14 years, had just ordered her to end her marriage. The word wasn't suggested, it wasn't recommended. The Queen had written, "Early divorce is desirable." Diana read it once, twice, 3 times. The letter was clinical, formal, cold, as if 14 years of Diana's life, 2 sons, and a marriage that had captivated the world could be dissolved with royal efficiency and a fountain pen. Diana set the letter down on the mahogany table. Then she did something the palace never expected. She smiled. What nobody knew, what the Queen's advisers never anticipated, is that Diana had been preparing for this exact moment for 8 months. And what happened in the next 72 hours didn't just shock Elizabeth, it rewrote the rules of how a royal divorce would unfold forever. Before we go any further, if you want to hear more untold stories about Diana that the palace never wanted revealed, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. To understand what happened in that sitting room on that December morning, you need to understand what the previous 12 months had cost Diana. 1995 wasn't just the year her marriage officially died. It was the year Diana stopped asking for permission. And Diana? She wasn't just a princess waiting for the palace to decide her fate. She was a woman who had spent 14 years learning exactly how the institution worked, and she was about to use that knowledge against them. But in the 8 months before that letter arrived, everything Diana thought she knew about royal protocol was about to become her greatest weapon. 1995. Diana was 34 years old. To the world, she was the people's princess. Glamorous, charitable, beloved. But behind the designer clothes and the smile that lit up every photograph, Diana was exhausted, isolated, and fighting a battle most people couldn't see. When the palace separated her from her personal staff in 1994, Diana personally called each one to thank them. "You've been more family to me than my own," she told her secretary. She refused to let the institution erase the people who had supported her. When Charles's authorised biography portrayed her as unstable and paranoid in 1994, Diana didn't collapse. She commissioned her own book through Andrew Morton. She fought back with truth. When the palace tried to control her public appearances in early 1995, Diana showed up at homeless shelters, AIDS clinics, and landmine sites. She went where they told her not to go. She touched people they told her not to touch. But Diana wasn't just defiant, she was strategic. She had quietly built relationships with her own legal team. She had documented everything, every slight, every manipulation, every broken promise. She had kept detailed notes of conversations with Charles, with courtiers, with the Queen herself. The problem was the institution she was fighting controlled everything: her title, her home, her access to her sons, her public role, her financial security. The palace was the crown, the government, the establishment, and the press, all rolled into one unstoppable machine. "They don't want me to disappear," Diana told a close friend in October 1995. "They want me to fade away quietly. There's a difference." And that's when the Queen decided to force the issue. The Queen wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. She was the embodiment of an institution, a woman who had spent 69 years being trained to put duty above everything else, above love, above family, above personal happiness. By 1995, Elizabeth had weathered 43 years on the throne. She had survived abdication scandals, constitutional crises, public criticism of the monarchy's relevance. She had raised 4 children while ruling an empire. She had buried the woman she loved like a sister. Her own sister Margaret's marriage had crumbled under royal pressure too, but the Queen wanted one thing above all else: stability. And Diana, with her emotional honesty, her media savvy, her refusal to play by the old rules, represented chaos. The approach was institutional: distance Diana, isolate her, control the narrative. Then, when the time was right, remove her from the royal family as cleanly and quietly as possible. The palace had done this before. They had erased Wallis Simpson from royal history. They had marginalised Princess Margaret when she became inconvenient. They knew how to make people disappear without making them martyrs. What Diana didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the Queen's letter wasn't a suggestion. It was the opening move in a carefully orchestrated endgame. The palace had already consulted with government ministers, constitutional experts, and senior courtiers, and this decision would strip Diana of more than just her marriage, but not for another 4 months. November 20th, 1995, 3 weeks before the letter arrived, Buckingham Palace was buzzing with controlled panic. Diana's Panorama interview had aired 15 days earlier, and 23 million people had watched her tell the world about Camilla, about her bulimia, about the palace's coldness. The Queen's private secretary, Sir Robert Fellows, who was also Diana's brother-in-law, had called an emergency meeting with senior advisers. "We cannot allow this to continue," Fellows said, his voice tight. "The institution is being damaged." The Queen listened in silence. Her face revealed nothing. "What do you propose?" she asked finally. "A divorce, immediate, clean. We control the terms, the timing, the announcement." The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly. "And Diana?" "We make it clear this is not a request." The decision was made that afternoon. The Queen would write to both Charles and Diana. The letter would be formal, direct, and unambiguous. It would use the phrase "early divorce is desirable," not as advice but as instruction. The palace lawyers began drafting settlement terms. They would offer Diana money, a substantial lump sum. They would allow her to keep her apartments at Kensington Palace. They would permit her to maintain her charity work. But she would lose the title Her Royal Highness. She would lose her place in the line of succession. She would lose official royal protection. She would become, in the palace's careful language, a private citizen. Diana had 2 options. Option 1, accept the Queen's terms, take the settlement, fade quietly into a comfortable, controlled life, remain grateful, remain silent. Option 2, fight the most powerful institution in Britain, risk losing everything, risk being portrayed as difficult, unstable, vengeful, risk losing public support. 3 weeks later, Diana received the letter. She read it alone in her sitting room. 6 pages of royal stationery, every word chosen with precision. What Diana didn't know, what the palace would never tell her, was that they had already leaked the story to the press. Before Diana even finished reading the letter, journalists at the Times and the Telegraph had been briefed. The headlines were being written, the narrative was being set. The palace wanted Diana to feel cornered, isolated, without options. They were wrong. But here's what the Queen didn't understand about Diana. She wasn't the naive 19-year-old who had walked into that palace 14 years earlier. Diana had learned. She had studied. She had become a master of the very game they thought she couldn't play. When the palace tried to control her image in 1991, Diana had secretly cooperated with Andrew Morton on a tell-all biography. She had fed him information through intermediaries. She had exposed Charles's affair with Camilla to the world. The palace never saw it coming. When they tried to marginalise her charity work in 1993, Diana had cultivated relationships with photographers, editors, and television producers. She understood that a single photograph of her hugging an AIDS patient was worth more than 1,000 palace press releases. When they monitored her phone calls in 1994, Diana had started communicating through trusted friends, using payphones, meeting people in person. She had learned to work around their surveillance. Over the 8 months before the Queen's letter arrived, Diana had been building her own team. She had hired Anthony Julius, one of London's most aggressive divorce lawyers, not someone who would negotiate gently, someone who would fight. She had quietly consulted with constitutional experts. She had researched precedents. She had studied every royal divorce, every settlement, every negotiation from the past century. She had documented everything: bank statements, letters, gifts Charles had given to Camilla, conversations where palace officials had lied to her. She had kept a detailed diary. Diana knew what the palace assumed, that she would be emotional, reactive, easy to manipulate. "They think I'm fragile," Diana told her lawyer in November. "Let them think that." The palace thought they were forcing her hand. They were wrong. Diana was about to force theirs. And on December 18, 1995, 10:15 a.m., everything was in place. Diana picked up the phone. She didn't call the Queen. She didn't call Charles. She called her lawyer. December 20th, 1995, 3:01 p.m., St. James's Palace, the Queen's private office. The room was wood-panelled, silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. Senior courtiers sat around a mahogany table: the Queen's private secretary, the Lord Chamberlain, constitutional advisers. They were waiting for Diana's response to the letter. They expected tears, or anger, or perhaps resigned acceptance. What arrived instead was a 14-page legal document. Diana's lawyer, Anthony Julius, had drafted it personally. It wasn't a response. It was a counter-proposal, and it was devastating. Diana's letter acknowledged the Queen's request for an early divorce. Then it systematically dismantled every assumption the palace had made. "The Princess of Wales agrees that an early resolution is beneficial for all parties," the document began. But Diana wasn't accepting their terms. She was dictating her own. Diana wanted to retain her apartments at Kensington Palace, but she wanted ownership. Not just residency. She wanted control. She wanted access to the boys, not supervised visits, not palace-approved schedules, real, meaningful custody arrangements that gave her equal say in their upbringing. She wanted her title, not Her Royal Highness. She knew that battle was lost. But she wanted to remain Princess of Wales. It wasn't just a title. It was her identity, her platform, her power. And then came the part that made everyone in that room go silent. Diana wanted full disclosure. If the palace wanted a divorce, she would agree. But she wanted a complete public accounting of royal finances: how much Charles received from the Duchy of Cornwall, how much the Queen paid him, how much Camilla had cost the family in gifts, properties, arrangements. She wanted transparency. The room went cold. Sir Robert Fellows read the document twice. His jaw tightened. This is not acceptable," he said finally. But it was brilliant. Diana had done what the palace never expected. She had turned their own weapon, publicity, against them. If you're shocked by Diana's strategic brilliance right now, imagine how the Queen felt. If this story is gripping you, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps us bring you more untold Diana stories the establishment tried to bury. If they refused her terms, she would take the battle public. And the public loved Diana. The public would demand to know why the palace was being so secretive, why they were punishing Diana, why Camilla's expenses were hidden while Diana was being stripped of her title. The Queen was informed immediately. Elizabeth read Diana's response in private. No advisers, no courtiers. When she finished, she set the papers down carefully. Then she spoke 4 words to her private secretary. "She's learned too much." Silence. 23 million people had watched Diana expose the royal family on television 3 weeks earlier. But in that moment, in that office, there was only the quiet realization that Diana had just outmaneuvered the crown. Diana hadn't just responded to the Queen's letter. She had rewritten the rules of royal divorce. Word of Diana's response spread through the palace within hours. By 6 p.m, senior courtiers knew. By 9 p.m, constitutional lawyers were being consulted. By midnight, the Queen's advisers understood they had a crisis. Sir Robert Fellows was furious. "She's trying to humiliate the institution," he told colleagues. "This cannot stand." The Lord Chamberlain was more measured. "She's learned from the Panorama interview," he said quietly. "Public opinion is with her. If we push too hard, we look like bullies." The Queen's press secretary was blunt. "If this becomes a public fight, we lose." But the palace had a problem. They couldn't simply reject Diana's demands. The Panorama interview had damaged their credibility. The public saw Diana as the victim, the wronged wife, the devoted mother. If the palace refused her reasonable requests, keeping her title, seeing her sons, having financial security, they would look vindictive. The palace attempted a counter-response. They leaked to sympathetic journalists that Diana was being difficult and unreasonable in negotiations. They suggested through back channels that Diana was demanding too much money. They implied that her mental health made her unstable for serious negotiations. It didn't work. The public rallied around Diana. Letters poured into Kensington Palace, thousands of them, supporting her, expressing outrage at how the palace was treating her. Opinion polls showed that 78% of Britons wanted Diana to keep her title. Editorial pages called the palace's treatment of Diana cruel and vindictive. Diana had won the public battle before the private negotiations had even begun. But the palace had one final card to play. "She can keep the title Princess of Wales," the Queen's advisers decided, "but she loses HRH, she loses precedence, she loses official protection." It was a compromise, or it was meant to look like one. On February 28, 1996, the divorce settlement was announced. Diana would receive £17 million. She would keep her apartments. She would be called Diana, Princess of Wales. She would share custody of William and Harry. But she would lose her HRH status. She would lose her place in official royal functions. She would lose automatic security. The palace presented it as generous. Diana called her lawyer that afternoon. "It's not what I wanted," she said quietly, "but it's more than they wanted to give." She had fought the crown, and she had won more than anyone thought possible. The story of that December letter didn't end with the divorce settlement. For years, the details of what Diana had written in response remained private, protected by lawyers, hidden in palace archives. But in 2006, nearly a decade after Diana's death, the truth finally emerged. When the inquiry into Diana's death, Operation Paget, reviewed thousands of documents, they uncovered the full correspondence between Diana and the Queen. The Metropolitan Police report found that Diana's response to Elizabeth's letter had been strategic, detailed, and legally sophisticated. The princess demonstrated a clear understanding of her position and leverage, the report stated. Her counter-proposal showed careful planning and legal guidance. The full extent of Diana's strategy became clear. She had consulted with 3 separate law firms before drafting her response. She had researched precedents from European royal divorces, particularly Monaco and Sweden, where divorced royals had retained titles and influence. She had built alliances with sympathetic members of Parliament who were prepared to ask uncomfortable questions about royal finances if the palace pushed too hard. The human cost was devastating. Diana had fought for her dignity, her title, her sons, but the battle had exhausted her, isolated her even further, made her enemies within the palace even more determined to marginalise her. Prince William would later say of this period, "My mother fought for everything, not for herself, for us. She wanted to protect us from the institution that had failed her." In 2020, royal biographer Andrew Morton revealed additional details. "Diana told me the Queen's letter felt like a divorce decree written by accountants, cold, transactional, but Diana refused to be erased quietly. The institutional response came slowly. In 1997, after Diana's death, the palace quietly reformed some divorce protocols for senior royals. In 2021, Prince Harry and Meghan's departure from royal duties echoed Diana's battle, fighting for autonomy, refusing to fade quietly, using media to counter the institution's power. No formal apology was ever issued for how Diana's divorce was handled. But here's what the 2006 investigation couldn't change. Diana had proven that the palace wasn't invincible, that one woman with courage, intelligence, and public support could challenge centuries of royal protocol. Diana had secured her son's respect. William and Harry watched their mother fight for her dignity. They never forgot. The tragedy is that Diana won the battle but lost the war. She kept her title. She kept her platform. She kept her son's love, but she lost her security. She lost her official protection. And 16 months after the divorce was finalised, she died in a Paris tunnel while being chased by paparazzi. Photographers she had no royal security to shield her from. This story teaches us something profound about power and dignity. Diana represented something the old institutions couldn't tolerate, a woman who refused to be silenced, who learned the rules of the game and played it better than those who created it. The lesson goes beyond royal protocol. It's about standing up to systems that want to control you, about using intelligence when others expect emotion, about fighting for your worth when powerful people try to diminish it. Diana once said to a friend during the divorce negotiations, "They wanted me to beg. I refused. They wanted me to disappear. I refused. They'll have to negotiate with me as an equal, or the world will watch them fail." Picture Diana in those final months of 1995, sitting in her apartment at Kensington Palace, reading the Queen's letter, 6 pages telling her to end her marriage quietly, obediently, and Diana setting down that letter, picking up the phone and refusing to play the victim one more time. The divorce settlement, £17 million to Diana, shared custody of 2 future kings, the title Princess of Wales, the most famous title in the world, still hers. But beyond the numbers, beyond the headlines, beyond the palace intrigue, there was a woman who taught her sons that dignity isn't given by institutions, it's claimed by courage. Diana didn't just respond to the Queen's letter. She rewrote the story of what it means to leave a marriage, an institution, a system that no longer serves you. If this story moved you, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another Untold Diana story. And if you haven't already, go ahead and drop a like on this video. It genuinely helps us continue uncovering the truth the palace buried for decades. Next time on Diana Untold. The night Diana discovered Camilla's bracelet just days before her wedding, and the 4 words she said to Charles that he's never forgotten. You don't want to miss that. Because Diana's story isn't just about royal drama, it's about refusing to let anyone, no matter how powerful, define your worth. And some stories are too important to forget.